Hey watercolor wizards, Hajra here. Today I'm super excited about doing a collab with a YouTube friend, Denise from In Liquid Color. Thanks for parking your brushes here and let the epic art adventures begin. Free Skillshare video links, art blogs, Q&As, sketches, deconstructed paintings, video notes, and art gifts are all at a single convenient and affordable tier for patrons on Patreon. So Denise and I talked about this collab a while back in July or August, and I'm so excited about it going live finally so I can see what Denise did for her project. Links to her video will be below and at the end of my video. So time was tight for various reasons as we were planning this, including that I'm going down to Southern California to help my mom recover from another surgery. So Denise and I decided we could use reference from past zoo trips and do some watercolor journal studies as a collaboration. So I started by choosing 2 photo references from a trip. The 2 zoos closest to me are the San Francisco Zoo or the Oakland Zoo, and I think the photos I ended up working with are from the Oakland Zoo. So what stuck out to me when I was looking through my photos was 2 of the bird photos that I had taken, and one of them is a flamingo and the other is some kind of tall fishing eagle, but I'm sorry to say I don't have the exact name of it. I dropped the photo of this mystery bird into Google image search and it guessed crane, but that's wrong. And then because I just had to, I dropped the watercolor study I did later into Google image search too, and it guessed cockatiel, which is even more wrong. So if you can properly identify this mystery bird, then please comment and let me know below. Once I decided on the 2 birds for my studies, I did my sketches on loose watercolor journal paper, which you can see has an older painting from before on the other side. I taped the paper down onto an old board game segment to keep it flat, and I do this for loose paper paintings all the time. And there's my cup of water, now in a metal cup versus a breakable glass one, and my travel tin of Sennelier pans I put together that I'm using for this video. I wanted to use this set of colors because there's a big range of reds and pinks, which I thought would be really useful in painting the flamingo. I swatched all the colors for this travel tin in another video, so you can totally check that out if that interests you. I was aiming for fast casual studies in a travel journal format with these birds and not polished and super planned out paintings. So it's going to be fast and informal work on these birds. And I'm going to quickly show my smaller moleskin travel watercolor journal, and it's one of the few intact travel journals I have left. It felt too small for me to want to do these birds in it for the video, but I did have larger watercolor journal paper that is from 2 of my dismantled watercolor journals. One of them was a Strathmore mixed media journal, and the other was a moleskin journal, and now they're both loose paper. For the travel watercolor brushes that I use, the 2 smallest ones are actually sold as mini makeup brushes, but I bought them because I thought they were adorable, repurposed for travel painting. The first one is a filbert, the second one is an angle brush, and both are nylon hair. I also pulled out 2 official travel watercolor brushes. One is a round nylon Da Vinci brush in a size 1, and the other one is a number 8 round from Silver Brush Black Velvet, which is a mix of nylon and squirrel hair. Really good quality and nice compact brushes. I like the silver brush better because it carries more paint and water, and it also connects into a larger brush handle if you like that. It was actually too long for me with the handle attached, so I just used it without the handle cover, but the Da Vinci one was the right length with the handle attached. The Da Vinci travel brush does have a screw-on handle versus the silver brush one that has sort of just a push-in handle. So what I did notice later was that the Da Vinci one can start to unscrew and loosen up as you're painting, so that's a little bit annoying. If you want to see some put together options for my ink, watercolor, and gouache travel painting kits, I actually shared them in a post on Patreon, so you can check that out there. I'm going to start painting now. My sketch transfer and freehand drawing process is not covered in this video, but all of that information is available in some of my other YouTube videos if you need that. I started with wetting the paper a bit and dropping in vermilion, that's usually a warmer color, and it suited the flamingo really well. I'm also going to use some alizarin crimson and some quinacridone magenta in smaller areas for some cooler, analogous colors on the feathers. I did a lot of wet and wet for the feathers to get soft cottony edges and blooms, but also switched to wet on dry whenever I needed for more control for shapes in smaller areas. It's such a deliciously colored and whimsical and goofy bird, I can totally understand why flamingos are such a popular art subject. The central binding just really annoyed me whenever I was drawing or painting, so I just turned it into loose journal paper that I can use for travel studies now. I also like to use watercolor postcards for travel painting since it comes in a loose, flat format that's really easy to work with, and you can also buy smaller sized watercolor blocks that are good for travel painting too. So you can use an intact journal, a watercolor block, a postcard, a dismantled journal page like I'm doing here, whatever works for you. I used ultramarine mixed with alizarin to create a deep aubergine color for the beak area and eyeball. It's usually better to use a custom dark rather than a flat black, though flat black definitely has other uses. I also put a bit of yellow around the eye and used just a dab of white to get a shiny highlight later on. It's funny how such a large bird has such a small eye. Flamingos don't use their vision to hunt prey like a hawk or an owl, so it makes sense that he has a smaller eye, but it's really silly cute how small his eye actually is. Denise has an awesome channel called In Liquid Color, featuring color spotlight videos and animal paintings. She used to work at a zoo, so she has experience with and affection for animals that really shines through in her work. I'm delighted to be doing a collaboration video with her, and so happy to have made a friend that's in my age group that does art, has a YouTube channel, and lives in the Bay Area, like I do. For the body, I mostly utilized a fast wet and wet technique to apply soft feathers with some areas of wet on dry with softened edges as needed. I gave myself a time limit of 45 minutes to do this flamingo, since it's just a fast, informal study. I love how wet and wet is great for petals or clouds or feathers. Such an impressive result from such a fast and simple watercolor technique. I alternated between vermilion and quinacridone magenta. The cooler areas will be the magenta and the warmer will be more vermilion. For the legs, I used the magenta and vermilion as well, along with some of the same dark violet mix I used for the dark beak area to get some dabs of dark in there. This is a brand new No. 8 silver brush black velvet, and the point on it is really fine, and I found that I could use it for the fine lines or dabbing in dots just as easily as the smaller No. 1 Da Vinci travel brush. And painting this animal is just like painting a dinosaur to me. All I see as I painted these long legs with these fleshy feet and the long neck is just how much this is a dino relative. It can be a small size to paint the details on the feet and the head, as I've gotten to painting smaller over the years, and I like how it makes my pieces finish up faster, and also they take up less space when they're done, as long as I can manage to be dexterous enough to work in tight, small spaces. And that's just practice. The body has dried, and now I'll go back and add some better direction to the loose feather implication. Just keep the edges soft and blended and fluffy, and it's all I need for fast feathers in this study. Some of them are super short, some are medium length, and some feathers are quite long, but they're all done with the same colors and techniques. The longest feathers are painted wet on dry, and the medium and short ones are mostly wet and wet. When it comes to using personal photo reference, it's often imperfect, and we as artists have to try to compensate for imperfect color, value, angle, or other compositional elements that might be lacking. I've discussed how a problematic reference can be spruced up with more lively colors, imagined props, selectively cropped, or a replacement background in a Patreon post recently, and that's good to check out for those tips. Part of the challenge of using this photo was to try to work around some shortcomings rather than just discarding it. Sometimes a weaker photo is just good for a casual study and drawing and painting practice, so it can't always be utilized for a super polished painting, and that's totally okay. I think it's really fun and less stressful to do casual studies. So what I did to help me out with this reference was I discarded the background for the flamingo and also later on for the second bird study because neither of them seemed very artistically worthwhile to me. So I went with the bare white paper behind the subject to make the studies faster and easier. And it's also a very common look for botanical or natural history studies to have a white background in a redoute style. You can also replace a blah background with an abstract textural one with blooms or salt effects, spatters, saran wrap texture, tea stains, coffee, you name it. And that's easy to accomplish in watercolor, but it has very visually satisfying results. So you want to have a little bit of something back there. It's pretty easy to toss in an abstract background before you get started on your subject. I also cropped in close to just this one flamingo, since he was standing among a big mess of other flamingos and ducks and stuff. The photo I had captured the whole body in an interesting pose as well as vibrant color capture, so once I cropped in and dropped the background, my work was really cut out for me. Flamingos are a large wading bird with a call similar to a goose honking, and there are 6 species living today. The one I'm painting right now is the American flamingo, one of the larger flamingos and also called the rosy flamingo, as its reddish-pink feathers are the most vibrant among extant flamingos. Flamingos have a very poor sense of taste and no sense of smell. They filter feed on brine shrimp and blue-green algae as well as larvae, small insects, mollusks, and crustaceans. Their bills are especially adapted to separate mud and silt from the food that they eat and are uniquely used upside down, which is why they have that cool shape. The striking coloring of their feathers, legs, and face comes from the food that they eat, and the name flamingo aptly means flame-colored. American flamingos are brighter because of the higher levels of beta-carotene in their food sources. The colors and soft feathers on this flamingo just make him look like a cotton candy bird to me. For the second bird study, I had a far weaker photo reference than I had for the American flamingo. So the mystery bird's feet were hidden, and some artifacts on the photo blurred the lower wing and tail areas, and a wire fence in front made the image even less clear to read. I also had no idea what this bird actually is. I should have paid more attention at the zoo. It's too late for that now, but I can't just look for other birds of this type in a book or online because I don't know what it's called. So I could just discard this bird photo as an art idea, but I really loved the pose that this bird had, like he was a jaunty fellow out for a walk. I also found his yellow eye area very intriguing. So I dealt with this problematic photo reference by discarding the background and making it a casual study like the flamingo, but I also had to go further. I used a bit of imagination to exaggerate the personality I sensed in the pose and decided to sketch him up as a fantasy bird character out for a walk, complete with fez, curl-tip shoes to replace the missing feet, a vest with a pocket watch, and some pants. It really helped make up for the missing elements and blurry parts of the photo. I tried to spend the bulk of my attention on the face and the hands and the feet for any animate subject. Everything else is less difficult to paint and doesn't need as much focus. So in this case, I tried to use care to build up the eye and brow area. If you look at the other photo I took of this bird, which is just another bad photo of this poor bird, you can see in it that he has some feathers that stick out around the back of his head like Einstein hair. So I put those feathers in long teardrop shapes in the painting, and with that hat on his head, it really looks like he's got a balding hair pattern that's left him with longer hair on the sides of his head, which I thought was another really fun and silly touch. And since the original was blurry and not very magical in the colors, I definitely livened up the colors here. This included not just the vibrant clothing, but also the bird's feather colors, which I did in blues and violets, and not in neutral black or gray. The colors I used for this study were ultramarine, phthalo blue, light yellow, quin gold, quinacridone magenta, and some of that leftover violet shadow mix from the flamingo for the darkest areas. This was a really fun, fast, and imaginative study, and it was a nice contrast to the more straight-laced and natural flamingo study. I think I would have liked to do some close-ups of their heads or eyes too, but my photo references weren't good enough in angle or quality to make that a great art option. I took these photos at a zoo like 6 years ago. Yeah, they really are that old. Since then, I've learned how to take better photos for art reference, so if these were more recent, I think I would have tried harder to get better photos, or at least numerous photos from various angles. It certainly was obvious how much more annoying, bad, sparse photo references can be. But it was also a useful challenge to use these weak photo references and just try to make the best of what I had, and that's always a fun, constructive experience. The painting techniques I've been using are similar to the flamingo: wet and wet for the soft cottony feather implication, and wet on dry for tighter detail areas on the eyes and beak or designs on the fabrics. Again, I used a leftover violet to do the darkest feather areas, and both the phthalo and ultramarine blues to do the shadows on his shorter body feathers. All the yellow areas had both the yellow and quin gold, eventually to give some depth. For the yellow areas on the textiles, I also added some shadow accents and white highlights to make them a little bit more complex. I wasn't as happy with this bird as I was with the flamingo, which I think turned out prettier. With this bird, I think the vest fit a bit poorly in the final image, and I think it's because the shadows underneath the vest settled differently than I wanted them to, so sort of distorted the belly feathers a bit, and I could go and lift that out and fix it, but it is just another fast 45-minute study, so I think I'm just going to leave it. I was happy with the decision to use more yellow as a pattern on the textiles, to repeat and expand upon it as an accent color because I found the yellow around his eyes so alluring. I dressed him up in like Eastern clothing, the kind you'd see in a country like Pakistan or Persia or Turkey. I think because he's a bird, we'll say he's from Turkey for obvious, cheap, punny reasons. And I initially thought about a Western top hat and a monocle and a cane, but I wanted more color pop, so that's why I went for Eastern clothing instead. The shoes were a lot of fun. Curly tip shoes are always whimsical, whether they're Middle Eastern in style or elf shoes. I did the fez in magenta, but I think I would have liked it better in the phthalo blue since it would have bookended the blue in the pants lower down. See how pretty those short blue pants are? That's when I realized I wanted to go back and do the hat in blue too, but it was too late, and that's okay. Well, wizards, I'm so glad I did 2 silly bird journal studies for this collaboration with Denise. Please go and check out Denise's side of this zoo photo art collab. I can't wait to see what she's created. I'm sure it's awesome. Links to her channel and collab video will be in the description box and end screen for your clicking convenience. Please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my website link, Skillshare, and Patreon page to support my art and art channel below. Thanks for parking your brushes here, and wishing you all magical watercolor adventures.